Good morning. Hello. Firstly, I want to thank everybody. I know people are going to be logging in a little bit throughout time this morning. We first want to give you a quick introduction to Promise Day as people are joining us. It's important to know that we started in 2017 on a whim, Paige Roseman, Abby Ryder, and myself. And the idea was to bring awareness to sexual assault and the campus resources available. But we found out that there was such a strong need that it has continued ever since. And so in the fall, during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we focus on domestic and dating violence. And in the spring, we'll focus on sexual assault awareness. And Professor Rose and I do want to put out there that if there are ever students who want to get involved, who want to help us with ideas, we would love to have it because this is your campus. It is your opportunity to learn and to grow. A lot of students don't realize that instructors care about a lot more than your grades. Now, we have to stick with policies. We have to grade you fairly, but we care about what happens. We care about the barriers to your success. Wake Tech is heavily, heavily invested in its students because when you are successful, you go out and you make a successful community, which builds for all of us. And that's what we're looking forward to. So when you're listening today, you're going to hear some rough topics. But we're going to have both on and on-campus resources that you can tap and look into that may help you out. Before I get started, I want you to all think for just a minute. And I want you to think about when you were taught to count seconds. Like most of us were taught 1 hippopotamus, 2 hippopotamus, or 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. So we want you to do that in your head for a minute. 1 hippopotamus, 2 hippopotamus, 3 hippopotamus. That's 3 seconds gone. 1 person is victimized by domestic or dating violence every 3 seconds. That means 20 people per minute. That means at the end of the hour, 1,200 victims of domestic and dating violence that we know of will have to deal with the consequences and the fallout. And the reason we say that we know of is people don't always report. It's one of the biggest concerns during the pandemic is that people are now shut in and not able to get away from the people who are hurting them. It's very easy to say it will never happen to you. I said it once many years ago and found out I was wrong. And it's very easy for us to look the other way when it happens to our friend and our loved one. But there are so many resources out there. So please don't think we only care about your grades. We care about you. So I beg of you, listen today, take this opportunity to learn and grow. You may not know someone yet, but you may know someone soon. So I'm going to turn over to Paige Roseman, who's going to introduce our speakers. Paige?
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you, Professor McElvaney. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes.
So I am Paige, and I am just delighted to welcome a number of different campus and community resources. So we're going to start off today by welcoming 2 of our wellness counselors. Elaine Rodriguez and Amanda Allen have been with us over the past year. They are incredible advocates for our students, for our faculty and staff, and we're just delighted to welcome them here today. So Elaine, you can take it away.
Sure, thanks, Paige. So I'm Elaine Rodriguez. I am one of the wellness counselors. And when we are on campus, although we're meeting for students right now for virtual appointments, I'm primarily at Northern Campus 4 days a week and then Perry Health Sciences once a week. I'm originally from Connecticut and I attended my master's program in social work at the University of Connecticut. I was working before Wake Tech here in Raleigh at an employee assistance program doing all telephonic counseling. And then back up north, I was working in an in-home program for adolescents and young adults, as well as their families doing intensive therapy.
Hi, I'm Amanda Allen. When I am on campus, I work primarily at South Campus and then once a week at RTP. So prior to coming on to Wake Tech in November, I was working at a nonprofit in Raleigh that focused primarily on youth and families in crisis, doing community health work. I also work PRN at Holly Hill Hospital. I'm from Apex, North Carolina, so I grew up in Wake County, attended NC State for undergrad and graduate school. So I'm going to go ahead and move on and talk a little bit about wellness services and what we offer. So wellness counseling is a Wake Tech resource that focuses on short-term counseling and referral services in a supportive environment. Our goal is to empower students to resolve problems and reach their personal and academic goals. So in wellness counseling, students can discuss and process feelings and concerns that might be interfering with their education. One important thing to note is that you do not have to have a diagnosed mental illness to make an appointment, although you can. So we also see students that are struggling with stress, motivation, or they might just be stuck and need help clarifying a problem. We also provide consultation, crisis intervention, as well as outreach services to increase awareness, prevention, education, and stigma reduction. There is no cost for enrolled Wake Tech students, and counseling sessions are confidential and not part of their academic records.
And I'm going to jump in a bit and talk about how we're scheduling right now. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we are meeting currently for virtual appointments only. There are a few ways you can contact us. So you can visit the website, and that's wellness.waketech.edu. On the left-hand sidebar, you'll see a tab that says Forms, Appointments, and Contacts. You can also email us directly. That's wellness@waketech.edu, and set up an appointment that way. And then if you were interested in contacting us individually, our contact information is on the website as well. Again, I want to emphasize what Amanda said. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you are concerned about yourself, concerned about a friend, stress, anxiety, even just to come in and talk. We're available for you. So please, any questions, reach out to us, or you can also put them in the chat later. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Amanda, as well. We are just so grateful to have you as part of our Wake Tech team. Speaking of, I'm going to go ahead and introduce next of our Wake Tech Police Force, Lieutenant Charlie Core. Charlie has been with us as we have held Promise Day events and tried to bring education and awareness and just a spirit of changing the culture. Charlie's been with us since day one. So to give you a little bit of a background, Lieutenant Core and Charlie has been with the Wake Tech Campus Police since 2012 as a patrol officer, detective, and in his current position as Administrative and Investigations Lieutenant. He served on the Behavioral Assessment Team since arriving at Wake Tech. And to give you a little bit of a background view, Lieutenant Core actually came to us with vast experience. He served 20 years with the New York City Police Department as police officer and detective. Next, he worked for 4 years at the Palm Beach County School Board Police, where he worked as an officer at a high school. Recently, before serving at Wake Tech, Lieutenant Core spent 6 years at NC State as corporal and detective, where he worked with a number of different units. And again, we are just so grateful that he has been so supportive and an incredible resource from the start. So we'll go ahead and welcome Charlie. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction, Paige. Currently, I'm on campus 5 days a week, and it is a very lonely place. We miss our students. You guys can't get back here quick enough, and hopefully that does happen. So I started police work back in 1982. And unfortunately, back then, domestic violence, I could almost compare it to a traffic violation. If we got called to a domestic violence call, it was you'd give a warning. Hey, don't do this. If you do it again, you'll get arrested. If you did get arrested, you got brought to the police station, and within 2 hours, you were released. Back then, there weren't a lot of services available for victims, and here is the abuser being let go and sent back to the home. It was very, very wrong and very sad. Fortunately, over the years, the laws have changed. Arrests for domestic violence are mandatory, and here in North Carolina, if someone's arrested for domestic violence, there's a 48-hour holding period. So that gives the victim time to find another place to live, get services, to get help. Unfortunately, on campus, we've probably averaged 2 to 3 domestic violence related arrests every year. Most of the domestic violence occurs off campus. The campus police, we only have jurisdiction, here on campus. But if you are a victim of domestic violence off campus, we can assist you in getting resources here on campus, as well as connect you with the police agency where you live. We have a very good working relationship with all the local police agencies, and we'll do everything we can to help you through the process. If you have concerns for your safety here on campus, we can provide a security plan, which is for on campus and off campus. We'll provide special parking, and we'll do an escort. And we've done them for students, faculty, and staff. If you don't feel safe, we have whoever it is call our dispatch center just as they're arriving on campus. An officer will meet them. They could walk right next to them and carry their books almost and bring them to class if that's their comfort zone. We could also walk, 20, 30, 40 yards behind you, and people wouldn't even know we're there, but we're keeping an eye on you and we're getting you to where you need to go. And we'll do this for as long as you feel it's needed. And it's a service we're happy to provide. I'd also encourage, if you have a friend who is a victim of domestic violence, speak to them, help them, encourage them to get some help, to report it. It's very important that domestic violence gets addressed as early on as possible, and the victim gets out of that relationship. Just kind of the other day, I was home watching TV, and I was on Netflix, and there was a series called American Murder, and it was one of the saddest shows I've seen. It was a woman who was originally from North Carolina. She was living in Colorado. She was married, had 2 beautiful young daughters. The husband was mistreating her. He ended up murdering her, murdering the 2 daughters. It was all over the news a couple of years ago. And at the very end of it, they just gave a statistic that 3 women a day are murdered by their partner. And it was just kind of sobering to hear that. Lastly, I would only imagine being a victim of domestic violence is embarrassing. It can't be easy to come forward and make a report, but it's nothing to be ashamed of. You didn't do anything to deserve this, even though your abuser may make you feel that way. It's not on you, it's on them. I can't urge you enough to get out of that relationship, to seek some help, because even when you get out of it, to work through it on your own, it's so hard, so to go out and get some help, I certainly, it's the way to go. And we have a lot of resources here on campus and resources off campus that we can point you to and get things going in the right direction. So again, thank you for allowing me to speak. And I'm here for anybody to call or send me an email, and I'll do whatever I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. We are truly appreciative again to work here with on Wake Tech's campus with incredible professors, with really awesome support teams with our wellness and our police. And I just want to remind you that there are great resources and wonderful people here to help, even when seeking help seems like the last thing you might want to do. So thank you for all the encouragement so far. So I also have the pleasure of introducing not just college resources, but incredible community resources and advocates. So today we'll be hearing from Kristen Howe of the North Carolina Victims Assistance Network. So Kristen joined NC VAN in December 2019 as the outreach specialist for the Homicide Advocacy Project. She is currently the Director of Program Operations. She is responsible for providing oversight for the statewide implementation of the Homicide Advocacy Project and the volunteer program. And you'll hear more about that in just a minute. So to give you a little bit of insight on Kristen's history of just advocacy and service, prior to joining NCVAN, Kristen worked for 20 years in the anti-sexual violence movement as an advocate and as a trainer. Kristen holds a Bachelor of Arts from Binghamton University and a Master's in Social Work from the University at Albany. While attending Binghamton University, Kristen interned at the Crime Victims Assistance Center, which led to a part-time job and the start of her career in victim services. After grad school, Kristen returned to victim services and worked at People Against Rape in Charleston, South Carolina, and as the Violence Prevention Project Program Coordinator at SUNY Plattsburgh and Clinton Community College in Plattsburgh, New York. So another amazing advocate from New York who is now here in North Carolina. Excited to have you. So most recently, Kristen was the Director of Training and Education at the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Kristen has happily called Raleigh home for the last 12 years while maintaining her New York pride, especially around bagels and the New York Yankees. So before I turn it over, I just wanted to mention that I will be monitoring the chat, and there's a little banner that will go up and encourage you from time to time. If you do have questions for any of our speakers here today, please just type them into the chat, and when we get the opportunity, we will highlight those questions. So welcome, Kristen, and thank you for being with us.
Great. Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, Claire and Paige, for this opportunity, for the chance to speak with you all today, to be able to participate in this year's domestic violence awareness event for Promise Day. So thank you. And to my new colleagues who I've met on this call, I look forward to seeing what we can do together in the future. Sarah, next slide, please. So what I want to talk about today is I really want to focus on the response and how we would respond if we suspect our friend, if we suspect that someone we love, if we suspect that someone we know is in a situation where there is violence present. And so, over the next 35 minutes together or so, I want to be fully honest and let folks know that I will be talking about domestic violence. Sometimes I'll use the language interchangeably with dating violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. I'll also, because of the nature of my work and also because of something we call polyvictimization, I'll also be talking about sexual violence, child abuse, and I'll talk about homicide as well. And so I say that to say, I know without even knowing who y'all from Wake Tech are on. I don't know you, but I know for sure that people who are listening have been victims themselves. And I know that people who are listening love someone who has been a victim, or they love someone who they suspect is currently in a situation where violence is present. And so I say all of that to say, please take care of yourself. We started out by talking about the resources that are available to you on campus. They're available virtually. At the very end of my presentation, there's a slide of national hotline numbers, state hotline numbers. We'll talk about local resources. So please do whatever it is that you have to do to take care of yourself. Also, because I identify very much as an advocate and I believe in letting folks know kind of what you're in for. And I'm also trying to be mindful of, again, I know that there are victims on this call right now. I just want folks to know that in my topic, in my talking, I talk with my hands a lot because I'm from New York, so I'll continue to do this. However, I won't be posting any images. I won't be using any videos or any audio, and I won't even be telling, I won't use storytelling. I won't tell victim stories through this. And again, I'm just going through this with a little bit of probably painful detail, just because I want folks to feel comfortable. And if you do have a victimization history, I want you to know that I'm not going to intentionally cause any harm over the next 45 minutes. The other thing that I just want to say is certainly if you have questions, please chat them into the questions box. As Paige said, she's monitoring that, and we'll take those in a little bit. I also just want to remind folks that this is being recorded, that the chat box is public for other people who are on this. And so I'm actually going to outright ask that people not share their personal stories in the chat box, just because this is also something that is being recorded and will be used afterwards. So if you have a story, if you want to talk about what happened, please contact one of us offline and not put it in the chat. And the other thing I just want to name, and this is, we right now are living in a really unique / really difficult time. And I just want to acknowledge the weight of right now. Because I know that many of you right now are sitting at home and you're being a student and you're a learner and you're also the chef and you might also be a teacher right now and you're the activities director and we're concerned about economics and we're concerned about the health of people we love. And so right now is just it's a heavy time, and I just want to name that. I can't fix it, I can't do anything about it, but I just want to name that we see you. We appreciate you being here. And if you are struggling, again, please reach out to the resources on campus. Okay, next slide, please. So a little bit very briefly, just about my organization. As a side note, I'll say for any of you who in your career, when you are asked to give a presentation, I'm a very strong believer in, even if what I am being asked to train about or speak about is not related to my direct day in and day out in my work with HAP, the Homicide Advocacy Project, I absolutely positively will take every opportunity to talk about my agency and talk about our work. So a little bit about NCVAN. NCVAN is a statewide nonprofit. We are a victim service organization. And our primary focus is working with homicide victims and the surviving loved ones of homicide victims. We also work with victims of other violent crime. However, working with homicide survivors and the surviving loved one of homicide victims, that's our primary focus. Okay, next, please. And we hear a lot from folks saying, honestly, why? Well, let me backtrack that. Truthfully, when I first tell people what I do, there's very often kind of a look of confusion, maybe being appalled, maybe being scared because they don't know what to say. And I kind of laugh a little bit because I was a sexual assault advocate for 20 years, so I'm quite used to that. I've made a niche of talking about some of the most awful, horrible things that humans do to each other. And in my world, I don't want to say that it's been normalized in terms of we accept it, because that's not true. Any advocate who I've ever worked with will say that if we can eliminate violence, if we can eliminate domestic violence, if we can eliminate sexual assault, those advocates who I've worked with are happily trying to work themselves out of a job. So I don't say that our work has been normalized to make it okay, but I also want to really smash a lot of the stigma that exists around victimization. Both Claire and Charlie had talked about it. Every 3 seconds someone is victimized. Charlie talked about the number of cases he saw at NYPD and what he sees at Wake Tech. We know that this stuff is happening. So the community agencies and victim advocates, part of what our work is to raise awareness and scream from the rooftops every single time we can, so that we're reaching victims, so that we're smashing that stigma. And maybe also, ideally, we're putting perpetrators on alert a little bit of, we know that this is happening and we are going to do our work to hold you accountable for this. So getting back to homicide. So when I say I work for the Homicide Advocacy Project, we get a lot of whoa, is it that big of an issue? Yes, absolutely, positively. So what we know looking at this slide here, this first number that I use, this 500 to 700 homicides in North Carolina every year, that's a rough national number that is given. Here in North Carolina, the State Bureau of Investigations maintains how many homicides happen by county and in the state. The most recent numbers on their website are from 2017. What we know is that in 2017, there were 637 lives taken by homicide in North Carolina. What we also know from the research, which is what I've cited here as our second talking point, is that on average, for every victim of homicide, there are 10 co-victims. So what are we talking about with co-victims? So in the world of sexual assault and domestic violence, we'll talk about secondary victims. In homicide, we call these folks co-victims. And who these people are, they are the loved ones who had their person taken from them. So children, siblings, family members, partners, spouses, co-workers, friends. That's who we're talking about when we talk about homicide co-victims. And that is who we at NCVAN work with. So that is even longer than I had wanted to talk about from my work. So what I will say, excuse me, is that if you're interested, please check out our website. Please send me an email. Sarah, if you can jump to the next slide. I just want to have this as a background talking point. This is a little bit of the work that we do within HAP, as we call ourselves. I love to talk about my job. Please email me. I'd be more than happy to set up a Zoom and we can talk more about HAP. Also, side note, NCVAN also absolutely works with quite a few interns every year. So if anyone has to do an internship and you're interested in victim services, if you're interested in trauma work, if you're interested in homicide work, please email me. Having said that, next slide, please, Sarah. I'd like to use the next 25 or so minutes actually talking about what we're here today to talk about, which is what is domestic violence. And so one of the organizations that I'll regularly refer to is the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So they are our statewide coalition. They are also a nonprofit, and I've also linked their website in the PowerPoint because on NCCADV, on their website, they have a county by county listing of all of the domestic violence programs in North Carolina. The domestic violence programs operate a 24/7 hotline. Hotlines are staffed by either trained advocates or trained volunteers. So some of what the domestic violence programs in North Carolina do, and it varies a little bit county by county. I should also say that in North Carolina, we have 100 counties, and every single county has a domestic violence program. Now, in some areas, one county may serve, for example, in Elizabeth City, which is in the northeastern part of the state, Albemarle Hope Line serves 5 counties. So they have a satellite office, but every single county has a domestic violence program. Here in Wake County, where I'm located, and many of us may be located, Interact is our domestic violence sexual assault program. So I could go county by county because it's kind of a fun game I like to play with myself, but we won't do that for the sake of time. What I will say is, please go to NCCADV for your local county information. And if you have someone who lives outside of North Carolina who you're concerned about, every single state has a statewide coalition. So that to me is always my go-to if I need if someone says, my cousin lives in Illinois and this is happening, what should I do? My first go-to is going to be, okay, let's go to the Illinois coalition. Let's figure out what county does your cousin live in. Let's get in touch with those folks. So I took this information from the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Domestic violence, dating violence, intimate partner violence, the definitions will vary a little bit, but a broad kind of generally accepted definition is domestic violence is a pattern of intentionally violent, and I want to pause and I want to stress that word intentionally. Domestic violence is a choice that a perpetrator makes. Domestic violence is not losing control or I just got angry, because that loss of control, that anger, isn't broadly exhibited. It is always targeted towards their partner, towards their children, towards pets in the household. So it is an intentional act. And I will stress that throughout my talk. And I also want to say, I understand if that makes some people uneasy. And I'm okay with that. And what I would challenge you to do is sit with that unease and figure out what about it is maybe making you a little uncomfortable. So back to the definition. Domestic violence is a pattern of intentionally violent and or controlling behavior used against a family member or a dating intimate partner to gain power and control over that person. I would also add in also to instill fear, and that fear is very often linked to that power and control. During and after the relationship. Domestic violence is also known as family violence, intimate partner violence, or dating violence. And things that I want people to think of is very often when we think of domestic violence, people think of physical violence because that is what we see. We see images of bruises and broken bones, and we see that. What I would encourage you to do is also understand that domestic violence absolutely is physical. There is physical acts, and it's emotional. Again, going back to that power and control, there's an emotional aspect to it. It is financial. We'll talk about this financial piece quite a bit in a second when we're talking about, domestic violence within the world of COVID and kind of what's going on right now. But what we know about finances is the financial piece is one of the top reasons, if not the number one reason, why most people stay in the situation they're in. And I know very often people have a very strong response to that of, well, if you're being beaten and if you're being abused and if you are afraid for your life, which is a very real thing in situations where violence is present. If you are afraid for your life, what do you mean it's about money? So I would ask folks to kind of pause and please think about the cost of signing a new lease on an apartment. There's a cost associated with an application. There can be a cost associated with turning on your water, turning on your electric. There's a cost. You might have to pay, as a deposit, a first and last month's rent as deposit. So if you're in a situation where maybe your partner is the primary source of income, or with a lot of domestic violence situations with this financial piece and with the control, we'll see where the batterer says to their partner, you can't work. You're not allowed to leave the house and go to work. So if you don't have any means of income and of all the things that I had just talked about, application for an apartment lease, turning the first month's rent, turning on your water, it makes sense to me. I understand why people stay. And then factor in if you have children, then factor in if there are, health needs, then factor in if you have pets, all of these things. So start to add this layer on and I'm asking for understanding of why victims may stay. So continuing on, so we talked, it could be physical, it can be emotional, it can be financial. Domestic violence absolutely is also, there's an element of sexual abuse as well. This could be an entirely different, conversation one day. But I'm going to make this statement of, if you are in a situation where there is violence present with your partner, you are also experiencing sexual violence. And what do I mean by that? If you are in a situation where you cannot say no to sex, or you think if you say no to sex, there might be beating, there might be, the pets could be harmed, there might be trouble, you don't say no. And what we know about sex and sexuality and healthy sexuality is consent and the ability to say yes or no. And if you want to engage in a sex act consensually, that's pretty foundational of if sex is violent in nature or if it is wanted and consented in nature. So I would argue that, again, not even argue, I would make the very strong case that if we're talking about a situation where there is domestic violence present, there also is sexual violence present. And then the other thing, and I might have kind of talked about this when we're talking about the different things with with domestic violence, is it can also be psychological and not can be, it also is psychological in nature. And that again can tie back into the emotional piece and also that financial piece. And so we get a lot of questions of, like, what does this look like? What are some red flags? What are things that people commonly talk about? So what I would like to say is, if we're talking about partners who are afraid to say no to their partner for anything, partners who are afraid, I should just say partners who are afraid, and that should be, I'll end that first sentence. If you are afraid of your partner, fear of your partner is not something that exists in a healthy relationship. Fear of a partner, that in and of itself is a major indicator that there is some really significant trouble here. Constantly, looking at some of the, the emotional or the psychological abuse. So constantly belittling your partner, telling them that they are worthless, telling them that they're stupid, telling them that they're fat, telling them that you wish that they were dead, telling them that they're a terrible parent. All of these things, that is the intentional breaking down of someone. That is intentional. The abuser wants the person to feel rotten about themselves. What that allows the perpetrator to do is gain some of the control. Statements of, I'm the only one who can take care of you, or even the statement of, I'm the only one who loves you. That's violent. That's not a healthy statement. Sarah, can you jump to the next slide, please? And so what I want to shift now a little bit, mostly because I didn't realize it's 20 of 11 already. And I really want to talk quite a bit about the additional challenges posed by COVID. So when I started out and I was talking about the weight of right now, this is some of what I'm talking about. What we know, and truthfully, y'all, I did not cite any of this in terms of sources, because there's so many, we're getting this information from so many places. We knew back in, I think it was back in April or May, RAINN, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. They run the National Sexual Assault Hotline. And I'm also talking quickly about some of the resources because they are on the resource page. But it was back in the summer. It was either, like I said, it was either maybe May-ish. RAINN released they had staggering numbers of hotline calls that were coming in. And I don't want to misspeak, but I think it might have been the highest, that month was the highest call volume they had ever seen. The other thing that came out of this information that we know from RAINN was that who was calling was completely different than they have seen before. So what RAINN told us, it was the highest call volume they had ever seen, and it was mostly youth who were calling. It was teenagers and tweens. And it is absolutely positively contributed, it's absolutely because of COVID. People are, and I should say, before I jump ship, because I was just talking about sexual assault, we've also seen very similar things with domestic violence and homicide as well. The New York Times released, I think the New York Times might have been the first one, but they wrote a really great article talking about domestic violence and COVID and the unique challenges. And it was, they had it from the perspective of law enforcement, and they had interviewed a prosecutor, and across the country. So we're talking across the country, we're talking multiple disciplines, and everyone was seeing the same thing. And so what are some of these unique challenges posed by COVID? And I want to go into this section by again stressing that domestic violence is a choice. It is a choice that the perpetrator makes. It is intentional. And I say that to say, a lot of folks, I've heard quite a few folks be very dismissive of this spike in domestic violence, sexual assault, and homicide that we've seen, just as, COVID's a lot, people are really stressed out. And so sure, I hear you. Yes, COVID is a lot and people are all very stressed out. However, that's not why, to me, that's not acceptable. That's not enough. That's not okay. That's not why we're seeing a spike in domestic violence. So COVID has played a role in it. What we're seeing is perpetrators are exploiting stay-at-home orders, and perpetrators are capitalizing on victims being isolated. So that's the takeaway that I want folks to walk away with as we're talking about COVID and domestic violence. It's how perpetrators and batterers are using isolation, are using resources maybe being shut down, how they're using that. So having said all of that, some of what we're talking about right now, specifically with additional challenges posed by COVID. And here's the part I would like to pause a little bit and again, just say, if you have been through a domestic violence situation, or if you are currently in a domestic violence situation, take good care of yourself. Please reach out to Elaine and Amanda, or myself, or whoever it is, or whatever your support network already is. So additional challenges posed by COVID, excuse me. One of the things is simply the close confinement. So when Charlie mentioned that now in North Carolina, there's there's a mandatory arrest and 48-hour hold. And Charlie said that gives victims time to find a place to live, maybe pack their stuff. So one of the things that we have learned, and y'all, I should have started out by saying this. I shouldn't be 40 minutes in thinking this. Anything that I have learned in my time and anything that I'm sharing with you, 95% of it I've learned from victims. I've learned from listening to victims. I've learned from answering the hotline. I've learned from believing victims. And I've learned by sitting with victims and closing my mouth and opening my mind and opening my ears. And I want to thank them. And I believe that victim advocacy is a privilege to work with people. So going back to this, so close confinement, what are we talking about? So we know from survivors that survivors are incredibly skilled, and they know when it's safe for them to slowly start packing a bag, slowly start gathering a little bit of extra cash, a little bit of supply of medication, maybe the birth certificates from the kids, and they have a bag that is very safely hidden in their house that they can slowly start adding things to, because what they're doing is making their plan. That is part of their exit strategy. And how does that happen now with shelter at home, or with us all working remotely? That close confinement, the perpetrator constantly being able to monitor the victim and watch them, is an incredibly unique challenge. And what does that mean? I can't count how many times I've already talked about hotlines and call and call and call. How do you make a phone call to a victim advocacy organization when you know that your perpetrator is in the next room, he's not going anywhere because you're sheltering at home, and he's watching your every move? Same thing, how do you call 911? How do you speak to an advocate to come up with a safety plan? If you have a safety plan and your safety plan involves, a daily check-in with your aunt who lives out of state, how do you still get to make that daily check-in when the abuser is in the home with you nonstop? Another thing that is a truly unique challenge right now, shelters. In our world, in the world of the anti-violence movement, we kind of got it down like clockwork. You call you call 911, or you interact with law enforcement, or you call victim advocacy, and you go into a shelter. Now, with COVID and with good fears, a lot of domestic violence shelters across the state had initially shut down. The shelter staff themselves were sick. Maybe they couldn't come in. Shelters were trying to figure out, if we're talking COVID, if we're talking transmission, how do we keep everyone safe? What do we do if someone is coming into shelter who has COVID or who has a fever? So this was one of the challenges. And a lot of programs responded by putting victims up in hotels, which, folks, sometimes I know folks have a response to that as well. And the simple answer that I'm going to give is, for a lot of people, a hotel is still a lot safer and more desirable than being in their home with their perpetrator. Some shelters have also opened back up. This is one of the things where I think it's really important to know what your community resources are and see what the status of your shelter is. Isolation. So one of the tactics we know from forever that batterers use with domestic violence is they isolate their victim. They, through very skilled means, get their victim cut off from their friends and their family and their network, their people. And that allows for the perpetrator to have increased violence, increased control, feeds into the victim feeling all alone, feels into the victim feeling like they don't have anywhere to go. And right now, again, with COVID, that is very real. COVID has isolated all of us because we've had to. So COVID has isolated all of us. So what does that additional isolation mean for victims? Abusers will claim violence is because of COVID stress. And my challenge to that is going to be, you did not beat your landlord. You did not punch the delivery driver in the mouth. You've never cursed out your doctor. I don't want to hear that it's COVID stress, because it's not. That violence is very directed towards the victim. It is targeted to the victim or the household, victim, children, pets. And I keep mentioning pets because that's another tactic that batterers very often use, is to harm the pets, to convey to the victim, this is what will happen if you step out of line. It's a means of conveying that power and control and instilling fear. And a couple last things, and then I want to talk about resources to round out our time together, and we'll take some questions. Again, going back to the finances piece. So pre-COVID, we knew that, like I had said, finances was a major reason of why victims stay. So now factor in, has the victim lost her job, or has the perpetrator lost his job? Or are they potentially maybe going to get laid off, or maybe going to get furloughed? And then all of the things that happen with if you lose your employment. Additional stress. Did you also lose your health insurance? What does that mean for your kid's asthma inhaler? What does that mean? Other challenges posed by COVID. At this point, how do victims know about resources? Thank goodness for the leadership at Wake Tech and the commitment to this, because how do we, over the years, gone are the days of health fairs and, different class presentations, or an internship fair where you can still learn about gone are those days. So how do we let victims know about resources? And here's something where I will say, and again, y'all, this could be a totally different talk someday. I know that very often people get there's a lot of criticism about, they call it slacktivism, but social media posts. Right now is a time when I am going to say, if you have Instagram, if you have Facebook, that is a phenomenal way for you to share information and to have your friends and your family see it. You're raising awareness, you're going to be challenging some of the stigma, and you never know who needs to see that information. What I would strongly encourage people not to do is, if you suspect that someone you love is being harmed or is in a situation where violence is present, please do not take it upon yourself to text them or email them a bunch of resources or mail them a bunch of resources. I know that that comes with good intentions. I know the intentions that are there. However, what it also does, though, is if a perpetrator saw that, one, now the perpetrator knows that the victim told you the dirty secret. So we're now talking very realistically about lethality. And I'm sure Charlie could speak to that better than I. The other thing is we don't, perpetrators monitor phones, they monitor email, they monitor the mail, they monitor calls. We don't want to do anything that is well-intentioned that could potentially cause more harm, which is why I'm saying Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, TikTok, like whatever y'all use. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's a great month to highlight and share some resources. One last thing, and then we'll switch to talking about resources. And I had kind of talked about this before. How do you make a plan to leave? How do you, gone are the days, well, no, maybe not gone are the days. It might be a little bit more challenging. We have, through the years, we've had victims who would go and stay with a family member or a friend. They have a spare room. I'll sleep on their couch. It's okay. Can you do that now with COVID? Possibly. It's not as easy. It's not as seamless. And then the last point I also just want to say is, for a victim, people are already feeling tremendous, despair and hopelessness and like they're lost. And that is amplified right now for domestic violence victims. Victims may feel completely, I'm stuck in this. I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know where to go. And Sarah, if you could move to the next slide. Here we go. And so here are things that I would say. If you suspect or if you know, what do you do? How to support this person? The possibly biggest thing I can stress is listen to them. And listening is not just hearing someone's words. Listening then also means don't counter with, oh my goodness, I can't believe he would do that. Or no, not her, she loves the kids. Or all of the things that people say in disbelief, or just, oh my goodness, I never knew that. Don't say any of that. Don't say any of that. Believe them and listen to the person without putting in what you think. Respect that they know their life better and they know the perpetrator and they know how the perpetrator moves better than any of us would know. Another huge piece, and I can't stress this, and y'all choosing to be here today is part of this. Educate yourself. Educate yourself and know the resources. You have resources on campus. Okay, even if the person you're concerned about isn't a student at Wake Tech, I don't know. I feel pretty confident in these folks that if you go to them, they're going to help you still find the resources for that person. They're not going to say, oh, they're not a student here, can't help you. Go to these folks. Know the community resources and know what resources are online. And Sarah, if we can jump to that quickly, I want to just highlight that with the next slide is resources. So I had already mentioned the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence. On their webpage, on their page, again, they have a county by county listing. I should also say, with any of these resources, you can call yourself, if you need assistance, and you can call anonymously. Y'all, I have been answering hotlines for 20 years. You don't have to say a thing about yourself. You don't have to say your name. You don't have to say where you're calling from. You don't have to. You can also call as a professional. I also wanted to highlight the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Again, on their page, they have a listing county by county of all the rape crisis centers. I can also tell you, per funding requirement, the domestic violence and sexual assault programs are required to operate 24/7. 24/7, 365, like they are always open. And again, it will either be a trained advocate or a trained volunteer who answers the phone. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, on their website, they have a wealth of information. They also have a hotline you can call. They also have a chat feature on their website. Also, any of these websites that I'm listing, they are also safe and secure and have a means. I say this with love. I'm not a computer nerd. I don't understand the techie world, but what I do understand is these folks get it, and they do have it set out so you can exit out of their screen without a browser history showing that you were there. The National Sexual Assault Hotline, which is RAIN, they have a hotline. Again, a ton of information on their website. They also have a chat feature. And I also wanted to name the DoD Safe Helpline, knowing that there are active duty military folks as well as veterans who will be getting this information. The DoD Safe Helpline, they have a chat feature online, they have a hotline, and they even have an app that you can download. And I also just wanted to mention the National Human Trafficking Hotline, because I think that that's also an important resource for folks to have. Same thing, they have a chat feature on their website, a hotline, and they have a text feature, which I thought was pretty great. There are also other resources. I went with our national ones, our state ones, and our state ones will list out your local county ones. And with that, Sarah, if you would just jump to the last slide. Here is my contact information. Please email me. And I just want to say again, thank you to those of you who joined us. Thank you for this opportunity. Be extra good to yourself. Drink water. And I kind of say it jokingly, stretch your back, but I also don't say it jokingly because we're not meant to be sitting in chairs for school and work and learning and Zooming with our friends and FaceTiming to see new baby. We're not meant to be in our chairs all the time. So stretch your lower back and take care of yourself. And I'll jump back into the larger group conversation.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Kristen, for all that you've done to share resources and advocacy. We just really appreciate you being here. I did want to open it up for a couple of questions, and I noticed that just looking at the chat here, I'm so thankful that folks have added questions. So thank you all. I am looking here, and it looks like the first question, Kristen, you had answered about all kinds of good things, including signs that someone may be at risk of domestic violence and how we should personally look out for ourselves and others. I'm going to move along to, just for the sake of time, and thank you, for the next two questions that kind of go together. So I have been thinking of how we can change the narrative of referring to survivors as a victim. So this person who commented says, as a survivor myself, I feel like this is triggering to me. And then below that, to add on to the question, what advice would you give to someone who might see domestic abuse happen with others? How would you recommend approaching it? And I know, Kristen, that you've already spoken to that a bit, but I would love for you to
thank you, Paige.
To share
so Marissa, very specifically speaking to you, let me say that my use of victim as survivor, absolutely, my deepest apologies for the triggering language. And yes, you are correct. And I thank you for also holding me accountable for that. When I speak, what I have learned is everyone who I've worked with has been victimized, not everyone who I've learned from has reached that place of survivorship. So what I should have done is use victim/survivor to be more inclusive, to include people who haven't reached the place of survivorship in their healing, and also acknowledge people who are survivors and who have moved through and kind of beyond the victimization. So thank you, Marissa. And my commitment to you is I will do better next time, without a doubt. And so let's see, the second question. So Carmen, yes. So what advice would you give to someone who might see domestic abuse happen with others? How would you recommend approaching them about it? That is a fantastic question. My initial thought is any approach, any intervention that we step in, anything we step into, anything we say, we want to make sure that it's not going to cause additional harm to the victim. So if the question here is talking about how would you recommend approaching them, if it's one-on-one and we know it's a safe place and no one is around and can hear the conversation and you're one-on-one with victim, I would say right then is the moment, be honest. Tell them that you are worried about them. Tell them that you are concerned about their safety, and suggest some of the resources. I would also listen. Maybe that's a time to question, what can I do? How can I support you? If you're talking, about if you're seeing domestic abuse happen with others, if you are somewhere and you're actually seeing a physical incident happen, I would suggest contacting 911. In that situation, if you are so inclined to choose to intervene, that is a personal choice. My suggestion would be absolutely as quickly as you can to contact law enforcement, contact 911 if you're actually seeing an incident happen. And let me just make sure. Yeah, and I also just want to stress, go back to the point of if you are talking one-on-one with someone, come from a place of how you're concerned about them and how you care about them. We don't want to shame and make anyone feel, stupid or bad for staying in the relationship. Yeah. So my first thought with this is going to be, honestly, contact your local domestic violence program, because chances are if you're having a difficult time connecting with a magistrate, I would contact the local domestic violence program, because that's in part what their work is as advocates, to work with law enforcement, the criminal legal system, judges, everyone in that realm. But Charlie, I'd also love to hear if you have additional thoughts.
Yeah, so to be honest, I'm not aware that magistrates have been hard to find. I guess there's a number, I can look it up, to speak to a magistrate. So I don't know if they're somehow working from home. But yeah, I like your idea as well, as far as contacting, because they, Interact would know.
Yep.
Yeah, if I can just put in here, I checked, Kristen, we had talked about me checking with my friend at the Wake County Sheriff's Office.
Yeah.
And I won't call him out by name. I don't want to get in trouble and not get Christmas cookies, because his wife is fabulous. But I did go ahead and check with him. And he said that one of the best ways to ensure that you get through is to call an advocate group, because as he put it, he said, they know where to find people. Whereas if you go through the regular court system on your own, it can be very confusing, especially at a time when you're vulnerable. And he said, you don't have time to wait on hold for 30 minutes to an hour if your abuser might walk back through the door. So his suggestion was get in contact with Interact or with your group or anybody who is in the advocacy realm, and they can help you facilitate what you need to do safely and quickly.
Yep.
So
that makes me happy that we're all in agreement there. Yep.
I wanted as well just to bring up one more quick question about the 48-hour hold. Had a couple of folks to comment on that, and I wondered if we might be able to speak to that, or Charlie, if you'd like to.
I was
that
frozen out. I
question.
just got back in like 3 seconds ago. So what was the question?
The question was just about the 48-hour hold and how that works.
Yeah, so I can only
to share with us just a little bit.
Share my experience with how it works. So the arrests that we've had for domestic violence, once we process them, we have a database where you get notified, for anything that the prisoner or suspect, his or her whereabouts are. And, it's always been 48 hours. And there is North Carolina General Statute 15A-534.1, where it discusses crimes of domestic violence, bail, and pretrial release. And at the bottom of the statute, it speaks of the 48 hours. So I can only speak from my experience, and that's what it has been. I'm not saying it's not possible that somehow it could not be, but I don't know. Kristen, do you have anything to say about
that? My response with that is going to kind of be, again, if folks are seeing that this isn't happening, or if it's, I honestly would fall back again. If people are finding that this is not happening in their communities, I don't want to put it back on the advocacy groups, but I would say get in contact again with your local domestic violence program. And I say that just because a lot of communities have what's called a community response team, or a SART team, sexual assault response team. And it is a monthly team meeting of professionals who, kind of like the folks on this call, kind of get together to talk about victim services and how things are going. And so if there is a gap, or if there is a hiccup or something that's just not working or not happening, those folks need to be alerted to it. Which is interesting because I also just saw that last question, and I actually love this question. I'm like smiling about it. Do you think sometimes we expect more of advocacy groups than they can give? And part of my honest response is, I've been an advocate for, I lie, but it's over 20 years now. I like to only say it's 20. And so part of me wants to be like, no, advocates are superheroes. Like, we're tired and we get defeated and we sometimes get a little discouraged. And any advocate who I've ever worked with in a domestic violence or sexual assault program has commitment that I don't know where it comes from, and drive that is also is often very personal. So do I think that we, expect more from them? No. And I also want to acknowledge, yes. Again, totally different topic, but sometime we can talk about funding and underfunding and what we are asking advocacy groups to do while still fundraising and recruiting volunteers and maintaining professional relationships and providing 24/7, 365 victim services. And then I'd go back to, no, I think advocates are some of the greatest people in the world for the work that they do. And that might be one of the most complicated and worst answers I've ever given to a question. And I think it's an amazing question, and thank you for asking that.
Okay, well, I hate to do this, but we do have to wrap it up. You guys asked some great questions. This is going to be watched on record later. And I know that the students who had a lab, et cetera, who said we have to watch at a later time and date, you may have questions. So remember, you are welcome to reach out to us, to Wellness Services, et cetera. Thank you to Kristen Howe for the time, the planning time, as well as the time today. We are so grateful to you and to the North Carolina Victim Assistance Network for being with us. Thank you to Charlie Core for always being an amazing part of our events. Wellness Services had a meeting at 11, but I've got to tell you, those people are absolutely awesome. Elaine and Amanda are fabulous. Please reach out to them. They want to help you. And then we just want to give a quick shout out, especially to Sarah Rothman, because a lot of students know Sarah Rothman's work. They don't get to see her. Sarah Rothman is the tech guru who makes all the polished Wake Tech videos and makes the live streams happen, which we could not do. I'm not putting myself or Paige down, but I have to be honest. Without Sarah, I don't think the virtual world could continue the way it does for those of us who are teaching at Wake Tech. And then last but not least, everyone from Christy Shields with Student Activities and Dean Beck, and especially our department head, Kim Eaton, and our associate department head, Tori Rohde, and then Lee Corbett in the spring. All of these wonderful administrators want our students to be successful. And without their backing and their willingness to let us do these projects, we would not have the opportunity to present. So we are really grateful that we're at Wake Tech. And so we want all of the Eagles out there, whether faculty, staff, or students, we want you to remember to promise to speak up, promise to believe, become your own hero. And remember, heroes ask for help. Asking for help is the greatest strength you will ever have. So thank you all for joining us today and have a wonderful week. Bye, everyone.